In this video, we are going to be exploring the programming concept of lists. Now, before we start to talk about lists, we need to be aware of what a data structure is. So a data structure is a way of organizing data within a program. So that's how we're going to define it. We're going to define it as a way of organizing data within a program. Now, we've already looked at one type of data structure, what was a variable. A list is quite similar to a variable, but rather than just holding a single value, like a variable does, a list can hold multiple values. So that is how we are going to define it. We're going to define a list as a data structure that holds more than one value and can be expanded over time. We'll just say that it can be expanded. We'll explore what that means in a few moments. So we're going to have a look at how we declare a list, and we declare a list in a very similar way to how we declare a variable. So we start off by giving our list a name, and I'm going to give my list a name of towns. That is my list's name. So I'm just going to label that in my notes as name. I then use an assignment operator, which is always an equal sign, and I'm going to label it as such as well in my notes. So the equal sign, it is an assignment operator. And then finally, I start to populate my list with values. So to do that, I put down 2 square brackets, and then between the square brackets, I start to state my values. So I'm going to put my first value as St Austell. I'm then going to use a comma, and then I'm going to put my second value as Bodmin, and I'm going to put my third value as Truro. It's not technically a town, actually. I'm then just going to label my values as values. Okay, so that is the basic construct of every list. We have a name, which is towns. We have an assignment operator, which is always an equal sign. And then we have the values stated between square brackets. So let's head over to our IDE, which is Replit, and start to program a list and start to access the values held within that list. So I'm going to start off by putting down my list name, which is towns. I'm then going to use my assignment operator, which is always an equal sign, and then between 2 square brackets, I'm going to start to list my towns. So I'm going to start off with St Austell. I'm then going to have my second value as Bodmin, and my third value as, I might do it differently this time, I might do it as Par. Now I access the values within my list slightly differently to how I would access a value that is stored within a variable. So I'm going to try and output my values from my list into the console. So I'm going to start off by using the print function, which allows me to output values, and then I'm going to start to access individual values from my list. So I'm going to start off by trying to access the value of St Austell. So I'm going to type in towns, which is my list name. I'm then going to put down 2 square brackets. And now St Austell is the first value within my list, but we access it in a slightly different way to how you might expect. So we go back to our notes and we start to look at our values. The first value in our list we call the value at the 0 index. The second value in our list, we call it the first index, and then the third value, we call it the 2 index. So to access St Austell, which is the first item in my list, I need to call the 0 index. So if I go back to my program, between the square brackets after my list name, I need to type in the number that shows the index of St Austell, which, if we go back to our notes, was 0. So I'm just going to put a 0 between my square brackets after my list name. When I run my program, when I execute my program, I can see that centhostel, which is the first value in my list, is the value that has been output. If I were to put a 2 between the brackets, I'm accessing the item, the value that is at the index of 2 within my list, which is par. So I can run that, and there we go. I can see par has been output into my console. Now, in our initial description of a list, we defined it as a data structure that can hold more than one value and can be expanded. And what that means is I can essentially add more items, more values to my list throughout the course of my program. So to do that, I call the, I almost call it a variable then, the list name, which is towns. I then use something called dot notation, which is just a full stop. And then I type in something known as a method. And the method that I'm going to be using is append. So I type in town, full stop, append with no spaces. I then put 2 brackets after append, and between those brackets, I type in the value that I want to add to my list. And I'm just going to add the value of, what should I add? I might add the value of the village that I grew up in, which is Blissland. Now, if I go to a new line on my program, I can use the output function again, which is print, type in the name of my list, which is towns, and then between the square brackets, I can call the index value of where Blissland will be. Now, there's already 3 items in my list. Par is at the index of 2. Blissland will be added to my list after par, so therefore it will be at the index of 3. So I run my program, and I've got a problem within my program. So it said, trace back most recent call last, file name main.py, line 5, town.append, Blissland. And it says, name town is not defined. And that's because I've typed in town on line 5 rather than towns. The list name is towns, it's not town. So I just need to add an S to the end of that list name. And now when I run my program, there we go, it's worked successfully. That's all I'm going to show you in this video. You use lists quite often within programming, especially when you are using iteration statements such as a for loop, which we're going to explore in another video.